May 16, 1940. President Franklin Roosevelt stands before Congress with a request that will reshape American industry. He's asking for 50,000 aircraft and a massive expansion of ground forces. But behind closed doors at the War Department, a more urgent crisis is unfolding. General George Marshall has just received the latest inventory report, and the numbers are devastating. The United States Army possesses 464 tanks, not 464 modern tanks, not 464 battle-ready tanks, just 464 tanks, period. Most of them M2 light tanks with 25mm armor and 37mm guns, already rendered obsolete by the war raging in Europe. 2 weeks earlier, on May 10th, German armored divisions had crashed into France with a force that stunned the world. The French army, equipped with over 3,000 tanks including the heavily armored Char B1, was supposed to hold. The Maginot Line, that engineering marvel of fortifications, was supposed to be impregnable. By June 14th, German tanks were rolling through Paris. The entire campaign took 6 weeks. American military attachés sent frantic cables back to Washington. The future of warfare wasn't infantry charges or static defenses. It was speed armor and coordinated mechanized assault. The German success wasn't just about numbers. Intelligence reports detailed the Panzer III with its 50mm gun and 30mm frontal armor. The Panzer IV with its 75mm cannon, capable of destroying fortifications. These weren't experimental prototypes. They were proven weapon systems that had conquered Poland in 27 days and were now dismantling the French army. America's M2 light tank, by comparison, was a relic. At 10 tons, with armor that could be penetrated by anti-tank rifles, sending American crews into battle with these machines would be sending them to their graves. General Adna Chaffee, chief of the newly formed armored force, had been warning about this exact scenario since 1938. Now his warnings were prophecy. On July 11, 1940, the Ordnance Department received its marching orders. Design and produce a medium tank capable of matching German armor, and do it fast enough to matter. The Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland became ground zero for America's crash program in tank development. Engineers pulled double shifts. Design proposals that would normally take months to review were evaluated in days. The problem wasn't just designing a better tank. America had to build an entire industrial ecosystem capable of producing thousands of them. The clock was ticking, and everyone knew it was only a matter of time before America entered this war. The American Doctrine, Volume. The meeting at Aberdeen Proving Ground on August 29, 1940, established a principle that would define American tank production for the entire war. Speed trumps perfection. Major General Charles Wesson, Chief of Ordnance, laid out the doctrine in brutally simple terms. German engineers were pursuing the ideal tank: perfectly sloped armor, optimal gun placement, revolutionary suspension systems. That pursuit took years. America didn't have years. The Ordnance Department needed a tank that was good enough to fight, simple enough to build, and fast enough to produce in numbers that would overwhelm any technical deficiencies. This wasn't ignorance or laziness. It was calculated pragmatism, born from studying how wars were actually won. The engineering teams pored over reports from Spain's Civil War, where Soviet T-26 tanks had been tested in combat. They analyzed the fall of Poland and France. One pattern emerged. The side that could field more tanks, maintain them in the field, and replace losses quickly had a decisive advantage over the side with technically superior but scarce machines. A single perfect tank meant nothing if it took 3 years to design and could only be produced in limited numbers. 1,000 decent tanks could decide the outcome of entire campaigns. The German approach was everything American doctrine wasn't. When the Heereswaffenamt, the German Army Weapons Agency, commissioned a new tank design, they demanded technical excellence. The development of the Panther tank, which wouldn't enter service until 1943, involved extensive testing of sloped armor angles, debate over engine specifications, and competitive bidding between manufacturers. Daimler-Benz and MAN submitted radically different designs. Army officials argued for months over which approach was superior. Every component had to meet exacting standards. The transmission alone went through multiple redesigns. This was precision engineering at its finest, and it was glacially slow. American engineers made a fundamentally different choice. Rather than design the perfect tank, They would design an adaptable tank. The specifications drawn up in late 1940 prioritized modularity. The gun mount needed to accept different weapons as they became available. The engine compartment had to accommodate various power plants depending on what suppliers could deliver. Armor would be adequate but not exceptional, thick enough to stop most anti-tank weapons of 1940, knowing full well it might be inadequate by 1943. The trade-off was explicit. Accept limitations now in exchange for the ability to iterate and improve rapidly in the field. This philosophy had a precedent in American manufacturing, Henry Ford's assembly line. Ford didn't build the best car. He built a car that was good enough and could be produced in revolutionary numbers. The Model T wasn't refined or luxurious, but 15 million of them changed America. The Ordnance Department was betting that the same principle applied to tanks. One genius tank designer couldn't win a war. 10,000 factory workers with standardized blueprints and interchangeable parts could. 90 days to the M4 February 1941, Rock Island. Arsenal in Illinois becomes the center of American tank evolution. The Army had rushed the M3 Lee medium tank into production just months earlier, and already it's clear the design is fatally flawed. The 37mm gun, mounted in a fully rotating turret, sits on top of a 75mm gun mounted in a sponson on the right side of the hull. British crews testing the M3 in North Africa are calling it a mobile coffin. The high profile makes it an easy target. The sponson-mounted gun can only traverse 15 degrees, meaning the entire tank has to rotate to aim. Worse, the riveted construction turns into deadly shrapnel when hit by armor-piercing rounds. The M3 Lee is obsolete before it even reaches the battlefield in significant numbers. William Knudsen, the former General Motors president now running war production, doesn't waste time defending a failed design. On April 11, 1941, he assembles a team at Aberdeen Proving Ground with a seemingly impossible mandate. Fix everything wrong with the M3 and do it in 90 days. Leading the effort is the Detroit Arsenal Tank Plant, a facility that doesn't even exist yet. Chrysler is building it while simultaneously designing the tank it will produce. This is American industrial improvisation at its most audacious. The engineers aren't starting from scratch, though. They're performing what we'd now call rapid iteration, keeping what works, ruthlessly cutting what doesn't. The breakthrough comes from embracing modular design principles. Instead of creating an entirely new vehicle, the team takes the M3's proven lower hull and running gear and essentially redesigns everything above the tracks. The sponson-mounted gun disappears. A new larger turret gets designed to mount the 75mm gun with full 360-degree rotation. The height drops by over a foot. Most critically, the team switches from riveted construction to welded armor plates. Welding not only strengthens the armor, it eliminates the rivet failure problem that turned M3 interiors into shrapnel chambers when struck. Each weld takes minutes instead of the hours required to properly rivet plates. Fisher Body Division, which had been building Buick bodies, masters tank welding in weeks. By July 1941, exactly 90 days after the project kickoff, the first prototype rolls out of the Detroit Arsenal. It's designated the T6. The Army tests it at Aberdeen, pushing it through mud, over obstacles, and firing thousands of rounds through the main gun. The suspension, borrowed and refined from the M3, proves reliable. The Wright R975 radial engine delivers adequate power. The cast turret, produced using techniques adapted from locomotive manufacturing, can be made quickly and consistently. On October 9, 1941, the T6 receives its official designation, Medium Tank M4. The British will give it a name that sticks, Sherman. The entire development cycle from concept to approved design took less than 9 months. German tank development cycles averaged 30 to 36 months, sometimes longer. The Panther wouldn't be approved for production until May 1942, and it wouldn't see combat until summer 1943, a full 2-year development and production pipeline. The Sherman would be rolling off assembly lines in volume by February 1942. The Industrial Weapons System, November 1941. The War Department makes a decision that will prove more important than any single design feature. Every Sherman tank, regardless of which factory builds it, will use standardized parts. This isn't just about convenience. It's about creating an industrial weapons system where the sum becomes greater than its parts. 11 major manufacturers received contracts to produce Shermans: Chrysler, Ford, General Motors, American Locomotive Company, Baldwin Locomotive Works, and 6 others. These factories had never built tanks before. Most had never built military equipment. But every single one will produce Shermans that can swap parts with Shermans built 1,000 miles away. The genius lies in the interchangeability doctrine. A transmission built by Ford in Michigan can be installed in a Sherman hull, welded by Chrysler in Delaware. A final drive assembly from Pacific Car and Foundry in Washington State fits perfectly into a tank assembled by Fisher Body in Ohio. This seems obvious now, but in 1941, it was revolutionary for military production. German tank production remained largely artisanal. Each factory had its own modifications and tolerances. A Panther built by Mann in Nuremberg couldn't necessarily use parts from a Panther built by Daimler-Benz in Berlin. Field mechanics learned quickly that certain components simply weren't compatible between factories. The German arsenal became a maintenance nightmare of incompatible systems. The American arsenal became a self-reinforcing ecosystem where every tank strengthened every other tank through shared parts and shared knowledge. The standardization strategy created an invisible logistical advantage that multiplied as the war progressed. When the 2nd Armored Division landed in Normandy in June 1944, their maintenance battalions carried parts that fit every Sherman in the European theater. The repair time for a Sherman averaged 4 to 6 hours for major component replacement. Compare that to German repair cycles. A Panther with a thrown track might wait days for a replacement from the correct factory, assuming one could be found at all. The calculus of production, January 1942. Production lines start moving at the Chrysler Detroit Arsenal tank plant, and the engineering decisions made months earlier begin paying dividends. The Sherman's power plant is the Wright R975 Whirlwind, a 9-cylinder radial aircraft engine. It's an unusual choice. Radial engines are air-cooled, bulky, and typically used in aviation, not ground vehicles. But in 1942, it's the perfect choice for one critical reason. They're already in mass production. Continental Aircraft Engine Company is churning out thousands of R975 engines monthly. No retooling required, no development delays. The R975 delivers 400 horsepower, enough to push the Sherman's 30 tons to a top speed of 25 miles per hour on roads. It's not impressive by engineering standards. The German Maybach HL230 engine in the Panther produces 700 horsepower. But here's what matters. The R975 is simple. Air cooling means no radiators to puncture, no coolant to leak, no water pumps to fail. Maintenance crews can swap an entire engine in under 4 hours using nothing but standard tools and a crane. Try that with a Maybach. The German engine required specialized tools, precise timing adjustments, and mechanics trained on its specific quirks. In North Africa, German tank units lost more panzers to mechanical breakdown than to Allied guns. The Sherman's hull construction compounds the time savings. Welded armor plates not riveted. A welded hull section that would have taken 30 hours to rivet could be welded in under 8 hours. The entire assembly process at Detroit Arsenal averaged 10 hours per tank by mid-1942. 10 hours from the moment the hull plates entered the production line to the moment a finished Sherman rolled out the Sherman assembly line borrowed directly from automotive manufacturing. Sub-assemblies built on feeder lines, final assembly on a moving track. Workers didn't need to be master craftsmen. They needed to be trained on their specific station, and the tooling did the rest. Compare this to German production. The Panther tank required approximately 55,000 man-hours to produce in 1943. Even after streamlining, that number only dropped to about 35,000 man-hours by late 1944. The Sherman required roughly 10,000 man-hours from start to finish. The math is brutal. In the time it took German factories to build one Panther, American factories could build 3 to 5 Shermans. The R975 engine and welded construction weren't the best engineering solutions. They were the fastest. And in industrial warfare, fastest wins. The cost of perfection, September 1941. While American engineers are finalizing the Sherman design, Germany's Heereswaffenamt receives alarming reports from the Eastern Front. Soviet T-34 tanks are decimating panzer divisions. The T-34's sloped armor is deflecting German 50mm rounds, and its 76mm gun is punching through Panzer IIIs and IVs like paper. Hitler personally orders the development of a medium tank that can counter the T-34. What follows is a masterclass in how perfectionism kills speed. The competition between two major firms, Daimler-Benz and MAN begins immediately. Daimler-Benz submits a design that closely mimics the T-34, practical, buildable, and could enter production relatively quickly. MAN's design is more complex. A front-mounted turret, a gasoline engine, and armor sloped at 55 degrees from vertical for maximum deflection. The deliberation process stretches from late 1941 into early 1942. MAN's design wins approval in May 1942, 8 months after the initial request, but approval doesn't mean production. The Panther requires specialized tooling that German factories don't have. The sloped armor plates can't be stamped. They must be rolled and welded at precise angles. The interleaved road wheel suspension, designed for superior cross-country performance, requires machining tolerances that slow production to a crawl. The Maybach HL230 engine is a marvel of engineering and a nightmare to manufacture. Cylinder blocks crack during casting. Crankshafts fail quality control. Delivery schedules slip month after month. The first Panther finally rolls off the MAN production line in January 1943. 16 months after Hitler's initial order. It's an impressive machine, but it's plagued with problems. The transmission, undersized for the tank's weight, fails constantly. Engine fires break out due to fuel system leaks. Of the 250 Panthers rushed to the Battle of Kursk in July 1943, nearly 200 break down before seeing combat. Many simply catch fire during the approach march. Even after the initial bugs are worked out, Panther production never reaches efficient scale. Total monthly production across all German factories peaks at roughly 380 Panthers. Compare that to Sherman production in the United States, 2,200 tanks in July 1943 alone. The German pursuit of technical excellence created a weapon system that was undeniably superior in one-on-one combat, but could never be produced in quantities sufficient to affect strategic outcomes. The 3-year development and production cycle meant the Panther arrived too late and in too few numbers. The battlefield math June 6, 1944. As Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, the mathematics of tank production translate into battlefield reality. By D-Day, American factories have produced 49,234 Sherman tanks. German factories have built approximately 6,000 Panthers and 1 E-300 Tigers combined. That's an 8.1 ratio before a single shot is fired. But the real disparity becomes clear when you factor in availability rates, the percentage of tanks actually combat-ready at any given moment. The Sherman's availability rate in Normandy hovers around 85%. Out of every 100 Shermans shipped to Europe, 85 are operational at any given time. The Panther's availability rate tells a different story, roughly 35% to 40% in the summer of 1944. Out of every 100 Panthers, only 35 to 40 are actually capable of fighting. The rest are deadlined with mechanical failures, awaiting specialized parts that may never arrive, or being cannibalized for components. Let's run the battlefield math. The 2nd Armored Division lands in Normandy with 186 Shermans. They can count on having 150 to 160 tanks ready for action on any given day. The German Panzer Lehr Division has about 100 Panthers in Normandy. On a good day, maybe 40 of them actually start. The American division can absorb losses and continue operating. When a Sherman throws a track, mechanics replace it in hours using parts that fit every other Sherman in the theater. When a Sherman's transmission fails, a new one arrives on the next supply truck. The Panther crews face a different reality. A thrown track might sideline the tank for days. A transmission failure is often catastrophic, because replacement transmissions don't exist in the supply chain. Panthers are frequently blown up by their own crews rather than abandoned, because recovery is impossible. The technical superiority that made the Panther fearsome in tank versus tank combat becomes irrelevant when the tank can't reach the combat adaptability under fire allied. Commanders understand the numbers game explicitly. American tank doctrine in 1944 doesn't call for Shermans to fight Panthers head-on. Why would it? A Sherman crew that spots a Panther calls in artillery, air support, or simply bypasses it. The strategic objective isn't destroying every German tank. It's advancing. Shermans can afford to avoid unfavorable engagements because there's always another Sherman, another route, another axis of advance. German commanders can't afford to avoid any engagement because every Panther lost is irreplaceable. August 1944. The Sherman proved something the Panther never could. Adaptability under fire. Since production began in early 1942, American engineers have created over 50 distinct Sherman variants without stopping the assembly lines. The M4A1 uses a cast hull. The M4A2 uses a welded hull with different engines. The M4A3 incorporates a Ford GAA V8 engine. The M4A4 stretches the hull to accommodate a Chrysler multibank engine, literally 5 automobile engines connected to a single transmission. Each variant uses the same basic chassis, same turret ring diameter, same track width. The modularity goes deeper than hull and engine swaps. When reports from Italy indicate Shermans need better armor against German 75 and 88 mm guns, field modification kits arrive within weeks. Applique armor plates that bolt directly onto existing glacis plates and turret fronts. Crews install them in hours. No factory recall required. No production line shutdown. When the British request a Sherman variant mounting their 17-pounder anti-tank gun, capable of penetrating Panther armor, the Sherman Firefly enters production within months. The Sherman also spawns specialized variants that German tanks can't match. The M4 Dozer for clearing obstacles. The M32 tank recovery vehicle for recovering disabled tanks. The duplex drive Sherman receives a collapsible flotation screen and propellers, allowing it to swim ashore during amphibious assaults. 33 of them make it onto Normandy beaches under their own power on D-Day. The Panther's technical sophistication makes field modifications nearly impossible. German engineers designed specialized vehicles from scratch rather than adapting existing platforms, turning each specialized German vehicle into its own logistical nightmare. The Sherman's greatest legacy isn't its combat record. It's the industrial philosophy it represents. Fast iteration beats slow perfection when production timelines matter. Standardization enables scale in ways bespoke engineering never can. Good enough in volume defeats excellent in scarcity. The Germans built magnificent tanks that arrived too late and broke too often. America built adequate tanks that arrived everywhere and kept running. When the war ended in May 1945, American factories had produced nearly 50,000 Shermans across all variants. Germany had built roughly 6,000 Panthers and 1,300 Tigers combined. The numbers decided the war long before the last shot was fired. The engineers who designed the Sherman in 9 months, using parts already in production and prioritizing speed over perfection, understood something their German counterparts never grasped. In industrial war, the factory is the ultimate weapon.